Well, let's move on to the final story we want to discuss today, which is probably the biggest one in many ways, and that's, of course, the fact that Konstantinos Karetsas is on the verge of joining Dortmund. As we record, he's completed his medical. Lars Ricken has spoken candidly about, him as a Dortmund player. We're just waiting for the official announcement. It may happen by the time people listen to this show. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dan, a record signing for Dortmund, at least maybe once you add all the add-ons and clauses into it. The record signing, of course, being Ousmane Dembele, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Although I did think...
It'll be a record kind of outlay, because Dembele, I think, cost about 15, but then they paid a large sell-on fee to Rennes when they sold it for 150 million to Barcelona, which is an insane amount of money now, but 10 years ago was completely bonkers.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the most they paid for a player just up front was Sebastian Haller, which is 31 million on this great website called Transfermarkt. So it looks like they'll be paying somewhere north of that, which is both reflective of the way the prices have spiraled, in recent years, but also, an indication that they need him. They really need, say, creative presence. They've had, for the last 5 or 6 years, you've had Julian Brandt basically being the only, creative presence in midfield, and he's a guy who has his great games and his, his inconsistent games. And so, Niko Kovač, who's not known for being a particularly creative coach, he's called for this, again and again, that we need somebody who can create behind the forwards there. But Guirassy is very much a typical striker. He's not such a guy to drop back and create. And the midfielders they have, you've got Job, Bellingham, and Sabitzer are guys who will elbow their way through the midfield. Even Felix Metscher has a bit of a goal threat, but then relying on him to do everything is a bit too much. So from what I've seen, I mean, people have called him reminiscent of Cherki, who, that would be great. I mean, Dortmund did have the chance to sign Cherki a couple of years ago, but fell out over, I don't know, the stationery was printed on or something like that. So who knows? But so rather than signing the actual Cherki, they've signed a young guy who could become him. But that's my Dortmund fan frustrations coming through. But he looks calm. He looks assured. He is a threat from set pieces, which is something they really need as well. So I think the only thing to mention is that it's a clear indication of the shift in strategy that Dortmund have had, to get rid of Sebastian Kehl, the sporting director, to bring in Ole Buch, and once again saying that we want to sign the next big stars again, rather than established players, which, the reason that they shifted to signing established players was that there wasn't a lot of stability by signing the next big stars ahead of their time. But this is the approach they want, and Konstantinos Karetsas is very much in that mold.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, they've taken a very clear step back towards youth players this summer. The players they've only signed 3 players before Karetsas is technically unveiled, with an average age of 18.3. Karetsas is 19 in November, so he's almost smack bang on the average age of the 3 other players they've signed. That's Justin Lerma, 18-year-old attack midfielder, Cal Prates, who's a left back, who's 18 years old, and Joan Gadou from Salzburg, who's 19-year-old central defender. And then, as we said, Karetsas will join as an 18-year-old. I'm really intrigued to see how he does, Dan. Our team in Belgium have been singing his praises for a long time. He was heavily linked with a move to Arsenal. You're right, the Cherki comparisons is there. I don't know if it's maybe a little too neat to say this, but he strikes me as the ideal Julian Brandt replacement. He's a playmaker in the pure sense. He likes to play between the lines. He's a very imaginative player. He's almost like this kind of mercurial player who likes to, you don't really have to slot him into position perhaps. He just kind of likes to float around. And it's a player that Dortmund desperately need. As you've said, you can maybe go through that Dortmund team on paper and say, yeah, Guirassy can score you goals, Fabio Silva can do something in the box. Max Bayer will work hard for you. Chukwuemeka can sometimes dribble with the ball, but besides that, you're kind of relying on Rierson or Svensson to accidentally swing a cross into the back post, in terms of a kind of attacking outlet. And it'd be interesting to see what he can bring to Dortmund from the very start, because I think he will be thrown straight into that team as that kind of attacking option. And it'll be very interesting to see if he's then joined by Sead Al-Mala, who, has also been heavily linked with the move to Dortmund. And it seems as though Dortmund are going to make a late push for him, which I think will also be desperately needed as well. Because you do look at that kind of team, that start 11, as it is right now. I actually saw on Reddit, someone posted their dream 11 for Dortmund next season, and it included a couple of players who've been linked to the club. But I had Maximilian Bayer at left wing back. And I thought to myself, if that is the best case scenario for Dortmund starting 11 next year, then they're in trouble. Not to say, I think Bayer's a very good player. I think he's a very hard-working player, and he's the kind of player who happily do a shift at left wing back. But I think Dortmund can aspire to a little more than that, to be honest with you. And yeah, I think Karetsas maybe does that. I think he brings that kind of playmaking skill. He brings a finesse to the team. I think he's probably opted for a move to Dortmund because he knows that he needs to make a step up physically. I know it wasn't maybe so much the case this season, but the season before, Genk were very reluctant to play him like 3 games in a row because they're aware of the fact he's still very young, physically speaking, and they didn't want to burn him out. I think that changed after this season when he went on to become a very important player for them. But it'll be interesting to see if he's ready to make that physical step up, because obviously, as we know, Niko Kovac's teams are very physical. He demands a lot from players to kind of run through brick walls for him. But yeah, I think, Dan, if I was a Dortmund fan, I've been waiting all summer for some good news. This is probably as good as it's going to get right now.
Yeah. I mean, the way things are looking, to then get Sead Al-Mala, I think would be a massive thing. It does feel a little bit like we talked about Rayan Cherki before. Feels like Rayan Cherki all over again with Sead Al-Mala, that I think in the end it was a question of 2 million or something like this. And, that kind of a guy who, Dortmund should be happy to snap up if they can. And if it fails because of a couple of million. I mean, this is the guy Sead Al-Mala has said, and through his mother, who's his agent, that they don't want him to move to the Premier League yet. They don't want him to leave the country, that it's only an hour away from where he was born in Krefeld to go to Dortmund. So they kind of want to keep that network around him, which is was a good instinct for a young player. So Dortmund just so happened to have a guy on their doorstep who they could sign for not a crazy amount of money. I mean, this is the money that this is slightly more than what's been thrown around for players who have never played a Bundesliga game, as we saw. And this would, I think, as well, there's something too about exciting the fans, exciting the fan base, and this is one of the next top German talents. So you could bring him in, and there's again a creative player who's a goal threat. They need more of that. They need more of that. They've got a lot of hardworking guys, which I think is a combination of the guys they're able to sign, but also the way Niko Kovač likes to play football. He will reward a hardworking person in training with a starting berth rather than someone who's perhaps talented but might not work as hard. But they need some of this creativity, and if they manage to get Al-Mala, and they've also brought in some young guys, from I think Brazil and Ecuador. They had guys that they'd signed a year or two ago, but who have arrived in this summer. So it's a very young team, but then it's not a bad summer for them. But I think you probably this is how Dortmund fans dream. They don't dream very high because it's painful. So the dream is to have Maxi Bayer at left back and driving the bus and doing whatever else he needs to be doing to get that team there. But I think Karetsas, it seems like it's done. So that's a nice addition, and in a spot they really need. And Al-Mala, I think, would turn this into quite a impressive, successful summer for the club.
Yeah, It'd be fascinating, and you're right. It'd be great for Dortmund if they could get Amal over the line as well, and we might reluctantly have to actually get excited about Dortmund ahead of a season for a change, which it's been a long time since that was the case, but would be very welcomed for sure. Almala is still very much, I think, one that's out in the long grass. So we'll put a pin in that for now, Dan. I think we'll probably jump back on if that deal gets announced.